So as with kind of everything, there's going to be a lot more detail on the written part of my blog than I'll put in these videos. But I just want to do a quick rundown of how we're kind of approaching our training for the PCT itself. And so the most obvious aspect of it is hiking and backpacking. And so as it stands, my wife has a 10 to 7 p.m. job Monday through Friday. And so during the week we're kind of limited in getting out there unless we take time off or there's holidays or something like that. So to start with, every Saturday we head out and do a major hike, whatever that is. And so during the wet season, we've had a lot of illnesses. Like all through December, I was sick for the whole thing. I was sick for like 6 weeks straight between cold and a flu, and sick again in January, and then in February, and then I think briefly in March. And I never get sick, so it's been really weird. But it's just our training kind of been a mess as we've hiked through some of that, but not a whole lot. But as it stands during the wet season, since we don't have tons of technical hiking experience with really aggressive scree or a whole lot of snow or something on mountains, we just wanted to work on distance, just getting our feet toughened to a whole lot of footsteps and our backs and shoulders and hips used to the weight and the contact of the bag for so many miles. And we were hoping to get up to 15 miles being pretty comfortable before winter really ended. And despite having such a big loss in time, the last weekend we did 13 and a half miles, and to be honest, at the end of the hike it sucked. The previous weekend we'd done 11 and a half, and it was a really good body day. We just felt good. We finished going uphill pretty steeply and just wanted more. We could have happily done 2 to 3 miles and felt pretty good. I barely felt it the next day, at least after a couple hours of moving around come noon. I felt good. But last weekend was not a good body day. It sucked. Mentally we weren't down. We weren't miserable mentally, but physically it sucked. It was pretty horrible. But the fact is that by afternoon or so the next day, in the morning, the first step I took out of the bed, I could barely put weight on my left foot, which is where I have most of my problems. But by noon I hurt, but not bad. It was really more discomfort. And so we've surprisingly been getting much better resilience, endurance, just by getting out there and adding a little bit of distance. And some have been decently flat, some have had a good amount of elevation where, Wildwood Trail and Forest Park in Portland, where we are, it's really pretty flat, but our GPS, our phone GPS, I don't know how accurate, it tells us roughly between up and down across 10 to 13 miles, we do near or a little bit past a vertical mile, including both up and down. So just the difference between them. But stretched over that much, it's really not much elevation change. But we've really been getting a lot more resilient, just simply adding 1 to 2 miles a weekend. My intention was just to add one mile a weekend, so as to not overload and actually cause injuries and slow us down. And we've had a couple where we kind of added closer to 2, and it was just it was a jump, but we've done pretty well. And now that the seasons are changing and we're getting into spring, we're looking to start doing elevation change, and we're going to probably taper it a bit, where next weekend we're going to do not that many miles. It's honestly 4.5, but we're going to go do Beacon Rock and Wind Mountain. Both are really short hikes, but they're really steep for that. So in the 1.3 miles one way for Wind Mountain, you go up 1,200 feet, which isn't, the tallest thing, the steepest thing out there, but per mile, when we've been doing nothing but flat hikes all winter, it's pretty steep incline to start with. Even though the mileage is pretty low, and the elevation between the two of them is 1,861 feet by what the guides say. But we're going to start getting some of the elevation, and we're still going to go out and get some more distance, elevation, and we're going to start moving the ratio as more and more elevation gain, but we're probably still going to get 15 miles of distance, where hopefully the next day we can walk. And so far it's been pretty encouraging. And so that's what we're working on for the moment, just on the hiking side. And we're going to be starting to at least once a month do a 2 to 4 day backpacking trip, so that we can actually get out there and get used to the real act that's more than just hiking, but setting up camp, eating out there, finding a way to actually sleep on pads instead of what you get used to with a bed, and just slowly adding elevation and distance. And so our big goals for the end of the year, we were hoping to get like 500 or 600 miles of hike distance this year overall, which with getting back into distance hiking for this next fall and winter probably won't be that hard to rack up. And we're hoping by then next winter to be able to do a 20 mile in one day pretty easily, and be able to do like 10 miles or 12 miles day after day on a backpacking trip and feel pretty decent. And we'll be working with that on and off throughout the year. But our real big goals is we're going to summit South Sister, which is the third highest summit in Oregon. It's actually, I'd have to look. It's only like 10,500 feet or something like that. And you go up a vertical 5,000 feet. The hike is around 10 miles round trip. And just for the pure enjoyment, we're probably going to backpack it and go up a decent amount of it, where you get through like most of the distance and a good amount of the height, and you camp next to a lake if we get out early enough to get a spot. And then the second day you go all the way back up to the top, and while we're out there for the weekend, we'll go do Broken Top, which is a small mountain. It's not a huge hike, but it's gorgeous, and it's just right next to South Sister. And South Sister itself, it has some technical hiking. It's really kind of like red, scree dirt that just collapses under you, especially near the top. But it's not climbing, it's not mountaineering at all. It's just a little bit more technical hiking, and it will kick your ass if you're not in good shape. Which means that a lot of our elevation and some of our distance training is to get us to do that come into September, beginning of October, probably, depending on how the weather is. And so we have a real Cascade Volcano Summit planned, which is just going to be so satisfying. 2 weeks before, we're going to try to go do Mount McLaughlin, which is a much easier hike. I think it's like somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 feet, 9 miles. And it's more in southern Oregon, pretty close to the California border, I think between that and Crater Lake, so the southern third of Oregon. And it's a significant Cascade volcano, but it's nothing compared to South Sister. And so we have some really fun summits planned that are going to be a real challenge. And our biggest backpacking trip is probably going to be the Timberline Loop that goes around Mount Hood. And so Mount Hood is the highest peak in Oregon, and I honestly forget the elevation. I think it's only like 11,600 or something, and that's probably highballing it a few hundred feet. But the PCT actually goes along part of the Timberline Loop, and so we'll be hiking on part of that, and the trail's only like 38 miles. It's not crazy, but it's just it is honestly some of the most beautiful hiking Oregon has to offer. And as the first time we got out there was the first time that we really felt like we were off in the wilderness when we hiked. Because even there's a lot of really honestly naturey hikes out here, but they're just not, they're so popular. Even the less popular ones are just so busy that you can't really feel like you're really off in nature. And even when they're empty, they just feel more like a park, even though it's a real nature park. So either way, that's essentially our hiking plan. Again, I've just kind of meandered on, saying a lot more than I tended to, so get used to it if you're gonna watch any of these. So basically, winter was our distance season, getting up miles. We're transitioning into still keeping that, but starting to do elevation. We're going to keep a little bit of distance in there, at least once a month or so anyway. And that may be more of just a backpacking trip where we do 6 to 10 miles in a day and do a few miles or a few days of that with some real elevation gain. But we're definitely going to keep that distance kept up and keep our feet tough. Including some spots that are more gravel or rock, and so you go and do 10 miles of soft dirt, awesome, but that doesn't mean you can go do 10 miles of gravel and scree and talus and stuff that just sucks, let alone lava fields or something like that. There's only a couple days of that in the PCT, but the point just being is we want to keep up that resilience. And just as we go through towards October, we're just going to be getting higher and higher elevation, as an actual literal elevation, like our highest hike before Mount McLaughlin and South Sister is going to be Cooper Spur on Mount Hood. and so you get a good amount up Mount Hood because you go up to 8,700 feet or so, and so you actually get that elevation, that altitude. But just working on technical skills as the season goes through and working on just elevation gain. Our first hike for elevation gets us around 1860 of gain. We'll be working towards where we hike more than 5,000 feet of vertical gain across a day. So that should give us some real goals and some real fitness out of it, because it's just hard work. And my wife carries a heavier pack than I do, both the pack and the contents, but she's probably carrying 25 plus pounds when we're not backpacking. Part for training and part just it's the weight of the equipment, and I carry one that's still 10 pounds on a light day probably. So once we start backpacking, we have our work cut out for us. Come the following winter, back to distance. We're probably going to still stick with a little bit of elevation because it's going to be time to get used to hiking in the snow in places that are a little bit technical to start with without the snow. Because when you come to the high Sierras, I don't want that to be my first experience working with altitude and elevation and technical stuff in snow. And so we'll definitely, the winter of 2018, do that the whole winter through, but I want to get that started this year. So either way, that's our hiking plans. And on my site, I have a link to our general hiking plan when it comes to actual hikes and what order. And that's definitely getting moved around a bit, but it was a good general plan. And again, I'm a fitness and a health professional, so I find it very hard not to plan things out, even though I know it's going to change and move around. It gives us a good rubric for how we're going to do it. And so on the other sides of it, the biggest thing you need when it comes to strength, for the most part, for these kind of hikes is strength endurance, the ability to go, that's a really tall hill. It's going to take some actual strength, but I'm just going to have to keep it up. It's not a 300-pound squat, it's getting your body up a really tall step over and over and over again. But strength programs really have their place. One, just to balance your metabolism if you need it, which I do, and just give you a good set of functional strength where if you have to climb over a talus boulder, you can. Or you fall and you got to be able to do a pull-up and get yourself out of somewhere, you need to. You don't know what situation is going to happen. So just on a safety survival basis, that's big. And my biggest concern now is building just general strength, functionality, and fixing my metabolism. So my lifting plan is just slowly working it in 1 to 2 days a week, earlier in the week so that I'm more rested for a big hike. And then it's going to be a 3-day-a-week just general strength program, which for those not really familiar with it, it's mostly going to be around kind of the major lifts, a deadlift, a squat, a press, a row, pull-ups and lunges, and a few other main accessories. And then a whole lot of functional work that kind of integrates that together, which is together but is separate. Meaning I do a lot of movement therapy or functional movement, which I'm not going to really get into in depth here, but every human is an animal, but we don't treat ourselves that way anymore. Which means a natural human, whether they were still farmers or more hunter-gatherers for a couple 100,000 plus years, would walk most of the day, would run, would crawl, would carry, would throw, would crouch, would do all these ranges of movements that we just don't do anymore. And being able to do those a good amount, well, with control, is something we just don't have. And so doing certain movements that really give what we'd recognize today as core strength, stability, balance, decreasing chances of injuries, and just making it so that when we have to go and do something like crawl under a tree with your pack on in a very weird geometric opening, you can do that without ripping your pack or damaging yourself. You'll be able to do it over and over again if you go through an area with blowdown or something. And so part's lifting and part is just movement therapy. And I have a sequence I go through each morning if I'm being good, which, because of my neck, I haven't been for a while. And I shot a video for that a little bit ago to show what kind of my basic functional movement sequence is, but it was mostly just to test what I could see with the camera. I didn't have my tripod yet, and so I'll probably reshoot that just to show an example. I mix it up, but it's a big part of getting those what I call movement nutrients that we're really missing. And so then when it comes to cardio itself outside of the trail, there's kind of two main sequences I run endurance athletes through, just people who want to gain endurance. And they're kind of specific, as you can sprint all day and it's not going to give you the benefit of doing, I mean, you could sprint as intensely as you wanted to, but that won't give you the same adaptations of keeping a steady medium to high heart rate for a long period of time. And you can run any pace you want for a long period of time, it's not going to give you the same benefits of a sprint or hill runs and stuff like that. And so there's two main specific sequences I go through. And they give a whole bunch of different benefits, from oxygen uptake and how efficient your Krebs cycle is going to be, and all this other biochemistry, human energetic stuff. But what it comes down to is the biggest adaptation is the first sequence will actually make the heart bigger. The volume inside will be larger, and not like the cardiac hypertrophy that they talk about or heart enlarging rather. It's not that. It gets larger because it's going to, with each pump, give you more blood. More blood will be pumped with every heartbeat, which means you don't have to beat as much to get the same amount out, which you feel quickly. When I go through the sequence, I can really feel the difference. Whether it's just walking up the stairs or a long hike, I go, wow, does not take nearly the same effort. And so really what that is that it's really simple. Once someone gets used to a little bit of cardio, they're going to get benefits across the board just to start spending some time doing whatever it is, whether it's jogging or riding a bike or swimming or something like that. But once they kind of have a base of endurance with cardio, I use a recumbent bike myself, especially because I can sit here playing Black Ops Zombies or something, or maybe reading or something or watching TV, but it just lets me multitask and not really notice the exercise so much, and so it makes it easier to incorporate into my day. But once I get a warm-up, I'm going to get to 60 to 80% of my max heart rate, which, regardless of your feelings on max heart rate, if you have them, they generally take 220 minus your age, and that's your 100%. Start with 60% of that after your warm-up, say it's 120 beats per minute, and do that for 50 minutes, and then do a cool down. So you've spent about an hour and 10 minutes on the bike. Do that 2 to 3 times a week. Each week, up that time by a few minutes or up by a few average heartbeats. I just take my pulse and kind of keep make sure I'm staying within that range. 1 week up distance, or time rather, and 1 week up intensity a little bit until you get towards that 80% of your max heart rate. And I do this maybe for 6 weeks or something like that. I mean, it really depends on the application, but to get a good chunk started, I do something like 6 weeks, where at the end, I might be doing 90 minutes to 2 hours of this steady state, medium-paced, medium intensity cardio. So obviously it's going to depend on what you have time for. If you only have an hour, then only do an hour, it's still going to help. And by the end of that, it will just add a big chunk to your cardio. And then I'll start tapering into a second phase that works in the thickness of the heart. Again, this is the one that it's not cardiac hypertrophy, if you've heard of that. And there's a few other terms they describe it by. It's not a bad thing, it's just this is how we want that adaptation to happen, so that it can actually pump the blood further with every pump, however much blood that is. And so this is a little bit harder to carry out, because what we want to do is that we want to keep up a high intensity, high weight cardio for a medium period of time, which means it's not sprints. A really easy example is if I use my recumbent bike, I pop the resistance up to near max, where it takes me like 2 seconds to get 1 revolution. And so I'm using, to get a little bit technical, the fast twitch strength-based fibers in my legs. But systemically, my respiration, my other chemistry going on, is able to keep up with it because I'm not doing it really fast. And so it's this weird mixture of muscle fibers and systemic cardio that makes you do a really high yield of work but slow enough that you can keep up with it by breathing. You may be breathing kind of hard, and you may or may not be able to keep up a conversation very well, but you can do the highest resistance you could keep up, and you may start and do 5 minutes in a row, and then take a minute or two, and maybe that's done, or maybe you do a second set for 5, but you basically add time week by week until maybe you're doing this for 2 sets of 20 minutes. It's hard work. You will be very surprised if you're doing a high enough resistance. At the movement facility I use, we have a Kaiser machine. Some of you may be familiar with. It's the one that you have a couple buttons and you up the pneumatic pressure and lower it. But there's some really expensive professional kinds where there's a sprinting or running machine, and so I can have someone in there slowly taking full-length steps as if they were sprinting, but really slowly. And I could put 1,000 pounds on that if I wanted to. I have pretty much limitless pressure. So it's meant for NFL athletes. We actually got ours from the 49ers training facility in California. The guy that owns the gym drove down and got them all at a discount, among some other stuff. And so most of you probably don't have that kind of machine, but it's just a really high resistance, slow speed kept up for a few. And so either way, those are the 2 main cardio methods I use. And I mean, really, like a lot of people do, you could just generally get out, do a stair step, or walk up a tall hill in your neighborhood or locally, find the tall trail and do that over and over again. And you can mimic certain parts of these. I'll do martial arts forms, and it will keep my heart rate up at a certain place, giving it a little bit more dynamic than just doing the bike. Granted, with the bike, I know it's locally affecting my legs, so I know I'm getting a lot out of it for those muscles, as well as systemic cardio with the heart, liver, and lungs. But you know, you have some options, and those are just the main guidelines. And there's a lot of other stuff that I would do to layer in endurance in different ways. But when it comes to just giving all day cardio, or I have a tall hill where, you know, here's a mile stretch and I'm going to go up 2,000 feet, these are going to be the most useful forms of training. And just getting out there and doing cardio will help, but these really give specific adaptations. They just give you the most bang for your buck. And again, you could go out and do really low intensity cardio for, you know, 10 hours straight, and it just won't give you some of these adaptations past a really low point. So that's really kind of the main of it. We have our hiking plan, distance, moving into elevation with certain technical aspects of it, getting used to backpacking, and then back into distance with more technical and more elevation next winter than we did last winter. General strength training for me, and that'll move into much more balance and stability demanding strength and strength endurance later. Once I just get my basic program out of the way. There's 2 phases of cardio, and then mixed in with all that is my general just functional movement on a daily basis. Later on, my workouts start looking more like that, but a lot more advanced, a lot more demanding, some with weight, etc. And I'll talk about those more later, just because I mean, some should have professional guidance, but some you can just kind of, as long as you're slowly progressing, work really well. And we have so many people that get overuse injuries on the trail, or just simply get injured on the trail. And a lot of the stuff that I do with my movement is stuff that can help minimize and prevent that. So if you have questions, please let me know. I know I kind of went into a lot more details than I probably thought I would, but more details will be in text, and just ask me any questions if you want, and some of this plan will evolve as time goes on.